Good evening, my freight-fond fiends. I am Lucius Voss, your midnight manifest, your customs agent of calamity, your personal parcel of poorly considered decisions. Welcome back to Spectral Margins, where even your return address won't save you. Tonight, we continue our descent into shipping and handling, the second installment of a 4-part misadventure penned by RedBadAndy. If you missed part 1, well, you're already in violation of several safety protocols. But do carry on. There's always room in the lost and found. Last, we left our brave little box kickers. Things were getting sticky, and not the packing tape kind. No. Think less fragile and more biohazard. Joining me once again in this warehouse of woe are my fellow laborers in lunacy. So clock in, strap on your steel-toed boots, and remember, if something inside the crate is whispering your name, don't answer back. Now, let's get to it. The drive to Denny's gave me time to think. Maybe too much time. Every scenario my mind conjured was worse than the last. Drug smuggling, organ harvesting, human trafficking. None of them quite fit what I suspected I saw, or at least thought I saw. Based on the hints and unnerving glimpses, I really did not know anything for sure about what was really going on at PT Shipping, yet anything seemed plausible. Jean was already there when I arrived, tucked into a booth in the far corner, nursing a cup of coffee. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a faded sweatshirt, but the severe bun remained, pulling her features taut.
"You came,"
she said as I slid into the seat across from her.
"Wasn't sure you would."
Of course. What is it you wanted to tell me? I was sort of hoping that it might be a bit more about what the hell we were moving in that place, I replied, keeping my voice low despite the nearly empty restaurant. What I heard last night, what I saw...
"You didn't see anything,"
Jean interrupted, her eyes hard.
"That's the first thing you need to understand. If you're going to survive this job, you need to accept that some things cannot be explained, or rather, should not be explained."
A waitress approached, but Jean waved her away with a practiced gesture. The woman retreated without a word, as if she recognized something in Jean that warned against interruption. I can't just pretend I didn't hear anything. I mean, come on, are we even safe? I asked, leaning forward. Something is wrong with those containers. Something was buzzing, maybe even scratching inside them. There were the screams during that so-called maintenance period. Jean's hand shot across the table, gripping my wrist with painful intensity. Her fingernails dug into my skin as she pulled me closer.
"Lower your voice,"
she hissed. Her eyes, I noticed for the first time, weren't just tired. They held a kind of haunted knowledge that made me falter.
"Yes, there were sounds. Yes, there were things in those containers that probably don't fit into your neat little understanding of the world. But knowing more won't help you. It will only make things worse. And no, strictly speaking, we are not what you would probably call safe. But the only way to guarantee you are not safe is to keep openly asking questions."
She released my wrist, leaving small crescent marks where her nails had been. I rubbed the spot, watching as she took another sip of her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. I can't keep working there, I said finally. Whatever's happening, it's messed up. At this point, the whole thing seems like it's a front for something massively illegal. I don't know how much you aren't telling me, but maybe we could go to the police. With everything we suspect, someone would have to investigate. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped Jean's lips, drawing glances from the few other early morning patrons. She leaned back in the booth, suddenly looking almost defeated.
You have no idea what you're dealing with,
she said, her voice dropping to a whisper.
The police? They already know, or at least certain people in the department do. Why do you think we operate so openly? Why do we have business licenses and tax ID numbers? This isn't some fly-by-night operation. PT has connections.
What kind of connections could possibly allow them to...
Powerful ones.
Jean cut me off.
Look, I've seen people like you before. Decent, moral people who think they can change things, who think they can expose what's happening and make it stop.
She leaned forward again, her eyes locking with mine.
Remember Jacob, the guy who had your job before you?
I shook my head.
Exactly. No one remembers Jacob. He decided to be a hero too. Took photos on his phone of one of the containers. Tried to open one when no one was looking. 2 days later, his apartment was empty. All his things were gone, like he never existed. His mother filed a missing persons report. Nothing came of it.
A cold weight settled in my stomach. You're saying they killed him? Jean's eyes darted around the restaurant before returning to mine.
I'm saying he disappeared, just like Marissa before him and David before her. People who ask too many questions don't last long at PT.
I swallowed hard and considered her words. It was too much at that point, and I just resolved to get out. I told Jean my plan. Okay then, I will just quit. I don't like it, but if something dangerous or illegal is going on that could disappear me, then I will just leave. I can even put in a 2 weeks notice. Jean laughed, a harsh and hollow sound. She looked at me like I was an unruly child.
You think that they would believe anyone could be so dense as to not suspect something? Even after one night?
So then what can I do? Why are you telling me this? Her eyes narrowed and she responded.
Because you need to know that you can't just quit now. You are in this, whether you like it or not. If you want to not disappear too, then just keep your head down, keep quiet, and do not rock the boat. The less you know, the less danger you're in. I have to go. You should get some sleep and remember what I told you. I'm off tomorrow. Try and keep safe while I'm gone. And take care.
She threw some money on the table and walked out without another word, and I was left stunned and speechless. It sounded like I was stuck, and I still had no idea what I had gotten myself into. My anxiety was palpable, and I'd hardly got any sleep when I returned home. If what Jean said was true, then the place I had just gotten a job at was hiding a dark secret, and I could not uncover it or leave and run away. I was forced, for the time being, to continue working for the bizarre company, continue shifting those mysterious boxes without ever knowing what horrors they might contain. When it was time to go back, I hesitated and almost considered calling out and not going. But I did not want to attract any unwanted attention just then, so I summoned my courage and went back to PT shipping for my second day of work. I arrived a few minutes early, but no one else was there to greet me this time. I shuffled in and grabbed a new manifest from my workstation and the tablet. I saw the first shipment was scheduled to arrive in the next 10 minutes. Then I saw that the list continued on to another page and realized that there were twice the amount of trucks that day than my first day, and I had no apparent help, at least with what I would be doing. I thought briefly about the other people I saw leave the building yesterday at 5 a.m. Why did they have us sectioned off and not working together? It was another question I would have to set aside. I was going to be very busy and thought that maybe the distraction might be nice. The first truck backed up to the loading dock with a low rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor. I approached cautiously, remembering Jean's methodical movements from the night before. The keypad by the door blinked expectantly. I punched in the code I'd memorized and stepped back as the door swung open. Unlike last night's mysterious black containers, this truck held rows of ordinary-looking wooden crates. They were stacked neatly, secured by straps, each bearing standard shipping labels and barcodes. No strange temperatures. No odd buzzing. Just regular freight. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe not every shipment contained whatever horrors Jean had alluded to. Maybe some days were just normal. The manifest indicated these were textile supplies for various retail locations across 3 states. Fabric bolts, perhaps, sewing machines, things a company called The Proud Tailor might legitimately ship. I worked efficiently, scanning each crate and moving it to its designated staging area. The forklift hummed beneath me, comfortingly mundane. For nearly an hour, I allowed myself to believe I was simply working a regular warehouse job, one that happened to pay extraordinarily well for night shifts. I thought I might be able to relax for a moment, but I heard the staticky voice of Matt through the intercom.
New guy, second shipment is ahead of schedule. It is a priority shipment. Get down to receiving, baby. Get a move on.
I was not even done with the first load, and now the next one was already coming. I was starting to get stressed out that I was falling behind. I rushed to Bay B, maneuvering the forklift hastily through the narrow aisles. As I rounded the final corner, I caught sight of the back of a sleek black truck, similar to the first one I'd seen last night. My heart immediately began to race, knowing what might be inside. Just as I approached the loading dock, the forklift sputtered, the engine making a high-pitched whining sound I hadn't heard before. The control panel flickered, lights blinking erratically across the dashboard. I tried to slow down, but the machine lurched forward suddenly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, narrowly avoiding a stack of pallets. The forklift shuddered violently beneath me, the hydraulics screaming in protest. Then, without warning, the lift dropped. Not smoothly as designed, but in a single catastrophic release. They slammed into the concrete floor with a deafening crash, sparks flying as metal scraped against concrete. I was thrown forward against the safety cage, my chest hitting the steering column hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. The forklift continued its chaotic movement, spinning in a half circle before the engine cut out completely, leaving me stranded in the middle of the bay.
What the hell are you doing?
Matt's voice boomed from somewhere behind me. I turned to see him storming across the warehouse floor, his face contorted with rage. The forklift just... I stammered, still trying to catch my breath. Matt reached me in seconds, his weathered face inches from mine.
Get off, now.
I scrambled down from the malfunctioning vehicle, my legs shaking. Matt circled the forklift, examining it with narrowed eyes. He ran his hand along the control panel, then knelt to inspect the dropped forks.
This equipment was checked yesterday,
he muttered, more to himself than me. Then his gaze snapped back to my face, eyes cold and calculating.
Goddamn interference is worse than normal. Were you near any red-tagged containers earlier?
No, I answered truthfully. I've been unloading the ones marked textile shipment so far. Matt's jaw tightened as he glanced toward the black truck waiting at the bay.
Well, the timing of this is awful.
He pulled a radio from his belt.
Gene, we need you at Bay B. Equipment failure.
There was no response, just static.
Right.
He sighed.
She's off today.
The back doors of the black truck swung open on their own, revealing the now familiar darkness that seemed deeper than it should be. A soft, rhythmic thumping sound emerged from within, like something repeatedly striking the interior wall. Matt cursed under his breath.
Those need to be moved immediately. Temperature sensitive.
He turned to me.
You'll have to move them manually.
Manually? I echoed, my voice cracking. You mean carry them?
The dollies are in the maintenance closet.
Matt growled, pointing toward a narrow door across the warehouse.
Grab one, quick.
I jogged to the closet, my mind racing. Manual handling meant direct contact with whatever those black containers held. The thought made my skin crawl, but I had little choice. Matt was watching my every move with increasing impatience. Inside the closet, I found several heavy-duty dollies designed for oversized freight. I selected the sturdiest-looking one and wheeled it back to the bay where Matt stood, arms crossed, foot tapping rhythmically against the concrete.
Remember the protocol,
he said as I approached the truck.
No unnecessary contact. Move them directly to the designated area.
He glanced at his watch.
I need to make a call. Get this done before I return.
As Matt disappeared through a side door, I faced the yawning darkness of the truck's interior alone. The thumping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that somehow felt worse. I steeled myself and rolled the dolly up the loading ramp. The first container slid forward as if pushed by unseen hands, just like the night before. Up close, without Gene's calming presence, the experience was infinitely more unsettling. The black surface seemed to absorb the light around it, and as I positioned the dolly beneath one end, I could have sworn the container shifted slightly, adjusting on its own to maintain balance. I carefully tipped the container back, distributing its considerable weight across the dolly's frame. It was heavier than I expected, at least 300 pounds. As I began to pull it down the ramp, a vibration traveled up through the handles and into my arms, a subtle rhythmic tremor like a heartbeat. The container slid off the truck with surprising ease, almost eager to be free of its confined space. I guided it across the warehouse floor toward the staging area Matt had indicated. With each step, the vibration grew more pronounced. When I reached the staging area, I carefully lowered the container to the ground. As it settled onto the concrete, a sound emerged from within, a kind of soft scraping like fingernails dragging across the interior surface. I jumped back, nearly losing my grip on the dolly. The digital display on the container flickered, the temperature reading jumping from -10 Celsius to -8 Celsius, then back again. The scraping sound intensified for a moment, then abruptly stopped. I stood frozen, staring at the black box. Something inside sounded like it was moving, scraping. The realization sent ice through my veins, but I couldn't afford to panic. There were still 2 more containers to move, and Matt would return soon. Forcing myself back to the truck, I repeated the process with a second container. This one was even heavier, and as I maneuvered it down the ramp, a thin sheen of condensation formed on its surface, immediately turning to frost in the warehouse air. The temperature display read -15 Celsius, colder than the first. As I positioned it next to the other container, both boxes seemed to shudder simultaneously, as if acknowledging each other's presence. The hair on my arms stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by security cameras or by Matt, but by whatever was sealed inside these mysterious shipments. I returned for the third and final container, my nerves fraying with each step. This one looked different from the others, slightly larger, with a faint red glow emanating from its temperature display. As I approached, a wave of dizziness washed over me, accompanied by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The container slid forward, but unlike the others, it moved aggressively, nearly crushing me against the side of the truck. I stumbled backward, barely catching myself on the loading dock edge.
Careful,
Matt said as he walked up behind me. He looked over my shoulder and saw the red glint of the item.
Not sure why this one was not red tagged on the list. Step out, please. I am taking this to the secure storage room. I need you to move all the other boxes to cold storage, and hurry. I don't have anyone else to spare for help at the moment, so just go as fast as you can.
I nodded quickly and stepped aside, watching as Matt carefully maneuvered the red-labeled container onto the specialized cart. His movements were precise, almost reverent, as he secured it with straps I hadn't seen used on any other shipment. The container emitted a soft humming noise that made my teeth ache.
Don't fall behind,
Matt called over his shoulder as he wheeled the mysterious box away.
and remember, no unnecessary contact.
I returned to my task, moving the remaining containers to cold storage with mechanical efficiency. Each one seemed to react differently to being handled. One vibrated intensely when passing certain areas of the warehouse. Another grew noticeably heavier near the loading bay doors, as if reluctant to be stored away. I tried to focus solely on the physical labor to shut down the part of my brain screaming that none of this was normal. The cold storage area was a maze of shelving units filled with identical black containers. The temperature was brutal, my breath clouding instantly in the frigid air. My fingers grew numb as I positioned each new arrival in its designated spot, guided only by the blinking scanner in my hand. I noticed that some of the older containers had frost patterns forming on their surfaces. Not random crystallization, but intricate, almost deliberate designs. Just as I finished securing the last container, the lights in cold storage flickered. Once, twice, then plunged into darkness for a full 3 seconds before sputtering back to life. I stood there, shivering and regretting not bringing a coat or something warm. Fortunately, I was finished. Back on the main floor, I discovered that 2 more trucks had arrived while I'd been occupied in the cold storage area. My heart sank at the sight of the endless freight waiting to be processed. Without the forklift, I'd have to move everything by hand. Matt was nowhere to be found, likely still dealing with that mysterious red-tagged container. I grabbed another dolly and set to work, my muscles already protesting from the strain of moving the first batch of containers. These new shipments weren't the black boxes that were still unnervingly heavy, crates of textile equipment according to their manifests, though they weighed far more than any sewing machine I'd ever encountered. I tried to maintain a rhythm as I wheeled crate after crate to their designated area. The warehouse seemed to stretch endlessly before me, distances expanding impossibly between loading dock and staging areas. My shirt clung to my back with sweat despite the building's chill. After I finished the trucks, another arrived with dozens of smaller packages needing scanning and sorting. Fatigue made me clumsy, and I fumbled with the scanner, dropping it twice and cracking the casing on the second fall. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. I had been working non-stop for hours, yet had barely made a dent in the night's shipments. The manifest on my tablet showed 3 more trucks scheduled before dawn. I felt a spike of panic rise in my chest. There was simply no way I could finish all of this alone. I worked non-stop, skipping whatever time I would have taken for a break. I was tired, hungry, and exhausted, and no one else was around to help. I lost track of time, and to my horror, I heard the 5 a.m. alarm go off. I dropped a box I was carrying, and it crashed to the floor. I was scared to look down at it, but when I did, I saw the box had not been opened. I bolted to the exit just in time, feeling the adrenaline surging through my veins as I burst out, immediately catching the anxious stares of a few coworkers from other sections of the warehouse. Their eyes were wide with concern, clearly worried about the chaos erupting behind me. As I hurried further away, I desperately tried to block out the ominous noises that began to echo, a sinister sound building in the distance. Suddenly, a whisper sliced through the tension, urgently vying for my attention.
Hey, you. Did you see Mike from Section 4? He was supposed to be right behind me.
I shook my head and watched as the blood drained from the man's face. I was about to offer some reassurance when the air was pierced by an intensifying buzzing and screeching sound, a cacophony that made my skin crawl. The others turned away, unwilling to face the impending horror, but the man who had questioned me stood frozen, fear etched on his features. The terrifying sounds from yesterday crescendoed once more, each note carrying the unmistakable clarity of a person's voice, a desperate cry for help. A scream tore through the air, sharp and chilling, and then everything plunged into an eerie, suffocating silence. I turned away, closing my eyes, and tried to steady my thoughts as I waited. Eventually, someone announced we had just 1 minute before maintenance time ended. We lined up to return to our stations, and I caught sight of the man who had asked about his coworker, shuffling despondently behind me. His face was a mask of hopelessness and despair. We all had a sense that something terrible had happened to his friend, but no one knew and no one dared to voice it. I returned to my station, so far behind in my remaining work that I felt hopeless. I toiled on mechanically, my mind a tumult of uncertainty and dread. My shift came and went, stretching nearly to 12 hours, finally ending after 9 a.m. Despite the exhaustion, I couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief over my circumstances. I staggered back to my car and drove home. My second day was over, and I found myself wishing I could just ignore the reality of my situation. I went to sleep and tried to forget it all for the small portion of the day I had left, before I had to go back for my third day. Predictably, I had only gotten a few meager hours of sleep. Even then, my dreams were haunted by the events of the previous shift. They kept replaying in my mind, the strange containers, the horrifying sounds during maintenance, and most disturbing of all, the missing worker no one would acknowledge. As I drove to work, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. I forced myself to relax, to breathe. Whatever was happening at PT Shipping, I needed to keep my head if I was going to survive long enough to find a way out. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived, just like before. I recognized Jean's beat-up sedan and felt a wave of relief. At least I wouldn't be alone tonight. Inside, the warehouse hummed with its usual eerie quiet. I found Jean at her station, methodically checking manifests on her tablet.
You look like shit.
She greeted me without looking up. Didn't sleep much, I admitted, dropping my voice. Not after what happened yesterday. Jean's fingers paused over the screen.
What happened yesterday?
Someone didn't make it out during maintenance, I whispered, stepping closer. I heard him scream. Everyone heard it, but no one said anything afterward. They just pretended it didn't happen. Jean's expression didn't change, but her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. She glanced at the security camera in the corner before returning to her tablet.
Accidents happen in warehouses,
She said flatly.
People get careless, don't follow protocol.
That wasn't an accident, I hissed. Whatever happens during maintenance killed someone. Jean slammed her tablet down and fixed me with a cold stare.
Keep your voice down. You want to be next?
The harshness of her words stopped me cold. We stood in tense silence until Jean sighed, rubbing her temples.
Look,
She said finally, her voice barely audible.
you're not wrong, but talking about it won't help you. Won't help anyone. Just do your job and stay alive.
How can you be so calm about this? I demanded. People are dying here, Jean. I know you are careful, but what happens if you make a mistake? It could be you next with one slip up.
You think I don't know that?
Her voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion I'd seen from her.
I've been here 7 years. I've seen things that...
She stopped herself, composing her features back into her usual mask of indifference.
We don't have time for more of this tonight. We have a lot of shipments coming in. Get your head in the game or get out and see how far you can get by running away. I thought you were smarter than this. Don't prove me wrong. Now come on. First truck's here.
She turned around and walked toward receiving. I followed her, my mind racing with more questions. At first, I did not want to let it go. I wanted to demand real answers about what was happening. But as I followed her, I started to relent and knew she was right. I could not do anything about what happened right now. I needed to keep my head down and focus on the immediate task if I wanted to make it through another night. The first truck backed slowly into the bay. Jean punched in the access code and stepped back as the doors swung open. This time, instead of the mysterious black containers, the truck held rows of large wooden crates.
Regular shipment.
Jean murmured, almost sounding relieved.
Grab the scanner and let's get started.
We worked in silence for nearly an hour, moving crate after crate to the appropriate staging areas. Fortunately, the forklift was working again and it helped make the process go a lot faster. I started to relax slightly, falling into the rhythm of scan, lift, move, repeat. So, I ventured cautiously as we took a brief pause between trucks. How did you end up working here? 7 years is a long time. Jean gave me a sidelong glance, seeming to weigh whether answering was worth the risk. Finally, she sighed.
Needed the money.
She said simply.
My mother was sick, cancer. The treatments weren't covered by her insurance. PT paid better than anywhere else, and they didn't ask questions about my background.
She adjusted her gloves, a little ritual I noticed she had when thinking about something.
By the time she died, I was in too deep. Couldn't just walk away, like you know by now.
I'm sorry about your mother, I said quietly. Jean nodded once, acknowledging my sympathy without inviting further discussion.
Second truck's due in 5 minutes. I need to check the manifests.
As she walked away, I noticed a slight limp in her gait that hadn't been there before. The physical toll of this job was evident, but I wondered about the mental toll as well. How many maintenance sessions had Jean witnessed? How many coworkers had she seen disappear? The intercom crackled to life, startling me from my thoughts.
Jean, report to my office immediately.
Matt's voice sounded strained, almost nervous. Jean froze mid-step, her shoulders tensing visibly. Without a word, she changed direction and headed toward the administrative section of the warehouse. The look she gave me as she passed was impossible to interpret. Perhaps a warning, perhaps resignation. Left alone, I continued processing the shipment, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in my gut. 20 minutes passed with no sign of Jean. The second truck arrived, and I found myself facing it alone, remembering the protocol Jean had demonstrated. I punched in the code, stepped back, and watched as the doors swung open. The air that was released when the doors opened felt oddly hot and musty. Normally, they were frigid inside. There was a terrible clattering sound from a fan that may have been the cooling unit. I was no HVAC specialist, but it sounded broken. Inside, there were only 2 large black containers. I scanned them and checked the temperatures and was disturbed when I saw that both were reading much warmer than normal. Instead of the usual negative numbers for the cold storage items, they displayed +9 Celsius and +12 Celsius respectively, far warmer than they should be. Something was wrong. I hesitated, remembering Jean's warning about containers that weren't operating correctly. I wondered if I should call Matt, but I remembered he was already with Jean and something about their meeting made me uneasy. I decided to follow protocol and move the containers to their designated area, hoping once they got inside it would not be an issue anymore. As I maneuvered the first container onto the dolly, a sharp, acrid smell hit me, chemical and organic at once, like formaldehyde mixed with rotting meat. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, but it did little to block the stench. The container seemed lighter than usual, almost buoyant on the dolly. Halfway to the staging area, the container began to leak. It started as a thin trickle from one corner, a viscous amber fluid that splattered onto the concrete floor with a hiss. Each droplet seemed to vibrate upon impact, spreading outward in perfect concentric circles. The smell intensified, burning my nostrils and making my eyes water. I froze, uncertain what to do. The rules were clear. Never open anything. Don't even touch the containers more than necessary. But something was clearly wrong and no one else was around to help. The leaking intensified, the amber fluid now streaming from multiple seams in the container. Where it pooled on the floor, the concrete began to discolor. As I watched the containers leak onto the floor, in confused concern, something even worse happened. To my horror, one of the containers emitted a grotesque bubbling and gurgling noise, followed by a distinct thud against its interior. The sound jolted through me. I stared in disbelief until the relentless banging persisted. Something was trapped inside, desperately clawing to escape. I was too shocked to move, to do anything other than listen to the panicked thrashing inside and watch the hideous container convulse and writhe with the efforts of whatever was inside. All the while, more of the putrid liquid splashed onto the warehouse floor. My terrified stupor broke, and I knew I had to do something. At that moment, I was driven by a desperate desire to throw the lid off and try and see whatever, or worse, whoever was in there trying to get out. Then I remembered the cameras and the ever-present danger of what happened to anyone who broke the rules. After an agonized moment, the thrashing in the container had abated somewhat, and to my shame, I had made my choice. I left the container on the floor, remembering the intercom boxes around the warehouse. I searched nearby for the closest one and called for help. "Matt and Jean, we've got a serious situation in Bay B." My voice cracked with panic as I yelled into the intercom. No response came. I pressed the button again, harder this time, as if that would somehow force them to answer. "Matt, Jean, 2 containers are leaking and one of them has something moving inside. I need help now." Only static answered me. The thrashing inside the container had quieted to an occasional thud, but the amber fluid continued to pool, spreading across the concrete in a widening circle. The air felt thick with the chemical stench, making each breath struggle. Suddenly, a new sound emerged from the second container, a high-pitched keening that oscillated between mechanical whine and human wail. The temperature display flickered wildly, jumping between numbers before settling on error in blinking red letters. "Screw this," I muttered, turning to run toward Matt's office. I made it 3 steps before the overhead lights suddenly dimmed, then brightened to an intense glare that cast harsh shadows across the warehouse floor. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of Matt's voice, a strange, modulated tone emerged.
"Containment breach detected in Sector 3. Containment protocols initiated."
A siren began to wail, different from the 5 a.m. alarm, more urgent. Red emergency lights began to flash throughout the warehouse, painting the dark corners with a hellish glow. Heavy footsteps pounded across the warehouse floor. Matt appeared, flanked by 2 men I'd never seen before. They wore hazmat suits, their faces obscured behind thick plexiglass visors. Matt's expression was thunderous, a vein pulsing in his temple as he surveyed the scene.
"Get back!"
He shouted at me, gesturing wildly.
"Breach! Get to decontamination! Now!"
The 2 suited men rushed forward with what looked like industrial fire extinguishers, but instead of foam or water, They sprayed a crystalline white substance over the leaking containers and spreading fluid. The chemical reaction was immediate. The amber liquid hardened, turning to a brittle, glass-like substance that cracked and splintered. "I tried to call," I began, but Matt cut me off with a savage gesture.
"Shut up and move!"
he snarled, grabbing my arm and dragging me away from the scene. I was able to glimpse behind me as we went back to the office and saw the hazmat men bathing the containers in what looked like some type of liquid nitrogen shower. I heard one of them mumble something about
putting them back on ice.
And then we were back down the hall and away from the mess. I explained to Matt that I thought the truck's cooling unit was broken and somehow the containers warmed up. I knew better than to ask him what the hell that liquid was or about what I heard and what I saw. He listened to my report and nodded grimly. "I wasn't sure what to do," I added, trying to keep my voice steady. "I followed protocol as best I could." Matt studied me for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable in the harsh office lighting. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before.
"You did better than most would have,"
he admitted grudgingly.
"At least you didn't try to open them."
A chill ran down my spine at his words. Had he somehow known I'd considered it? Matt's jaw shifted into something akin to a smile.
"Temperature control failure happens sometimes during transport."
He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small metal flask. Taking a deep swig, he offered it to me.
"Drink. It'll help with the exposure."
I hesitated, but the burning in my throat from the chemical fumes made the offer tempting. I took the flask and gulped down a mouthful of what turned out to be surprisingly smooth whiskey. "Thanks," I said, handing it back. Matt studied me again, something calculating in his gaze.
"You did well. Take a break and have a breather outside. We still need to sanitize baby. You can get back to it when you return."
I was thankful to get the impromptu break to clear my head from the things I had just witnessed. I stepped outside just as Jean was returning. She nodded briefly at me in passing and moved on before I could try and speak with her. I figured she must have been busy, but I wanted to tell her about what I saw. I went outside and got in my car, trying to decompress. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The thrashing inside that container, the amber fluid eating through the concrete, none of it could be explained by any legitimate shipping operation. The tap on my window nearly made me jump out of my skin. A woman stood beside my car, her face partially obscured by the hood of a dark jacket. When I didn't immediately respond, she tapped again, harder this time, her knuckles rapping impatiently against the glass. I lowered the window a few inches, caution overriding courtesy. "Can I help you?" In one fluid motion, she pulled a gun from her pocket and aimed it directly at my face.
Don't scream, don't move.
Her voice was steady, despite the slight tremor in her hand.
Get out of the car. You are going to help me get in there and find my brother.
The gun trembled slightly in her hand, near a very well-detailed dragon tattoo that circled her wrist. Her eyes remained fixed and determined. She couldn't have been more than 30, with dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept in days. "Listen," I said, raising my hand slowly. I just started working here. I don't know anything about...
Shut up.
She hissed.
Mike worked here for 3 months. Yesterday he didn't come home. His car's still even in the lot, but no one's seen him. The police said he has not been gone long enough to declare missing, that sometimes people just leave. But I know my brother. He wouldn't just disappear. He never told me the specifics, but he was terrified of this place. I don't know why he kept coming here for work, but I knew if he did not come home, that something would have happened here.
Mike. The name hit me like a physical blow. The missing worker from yesterday's maintenance period. The one who didn't make it out in time. You need to leave, I whispered urgently. This place isn't safe. If they catch you here...
I don't care.
She interrupted, pressing the gun closer.
3 months ago, Mike started acting strange, paranoid. He wouldn't talk about his job, but he was terrified of something. Then yesterday, nothing. His roommate said he went to work and never came back.
A tear slid down her cheek.
Now get out of the car.
My mind raced. If I helped her, I'd be breaking a rule. If I refused, she might shoot me. And if she went in there alone, she'd almost certainly disappear. I had no clue what to do, but for the time being, I obliged and stepped out of my car. Please, you have to understand, I whispered, eyeing the gun nervously. Whatever happened to your brother, I'm sorry, but going in there is suicide. The things I've seen in just 2 days.
I don't need your sympathy.
She snapped, though her voice wavered.
I need answers, and you're going to help me get them.
And there you have it, my beleaguered box monkeys. Part 2 of shipping and handling. Still think that job listing with competitive pay was worth it? Our inventory of doom will be restocked next week, courtesy of RedBadAndy's fevered imagination and vocal stylings of our wonderful team here at Spectral Margins, all of whom are now unionized in hell. As always, I remain your graveyard shift supervisor, Lucius Voss, reminding you, never accept a package you didn't order, especially if it's ticking, or whispering, or bleeding. Until next time, keep your seals tight, your forklift charged, and your resignation letter close. You're going to need it. Good night.